Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Oh, here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sitting down. It's a very rare thing for me. So you see the double chin, that's why. Very sensitive about it. Hey, Laura, obviously we made it safely. Thank you. Hey, Dina. Hey, Christy over in the other room. I'll come over and say hi to everybody in a bit. Hey, Eric and Marie and Lorena. Hey, Mom. Hey, Luann. Mom also in the other room. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Octavio. Hello from Cassidy and Christie's house.
Clarinet and the even more torrid band who pervades assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Hey, Heather. Hey, Gladys. Hey, Jean and Don. Hey, Betsy. Hey, everybody. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Rodney. Hey, Emily. Hey, all around. I'll be drinking this stuff called Cha-Cha. Apparently in Soviet Georgia, they walk around drinking out of Pepsi bottles. But it's actually like a grape vodka. Do you get to see Luca? That I don't know. I'm not going to make Luca commit to anything. Hey, Karen. Hey, Grandma Belle, who's also just in the other room. You'll get to see all of these guys anyway. I'm just going to be sipping this slowly. I'm told it tastes like a grape version of limoncello. That's about right. The dead ringers and their entourage got hung up at the airport, but we'll see them some point over the course of the week. Evening, everybody. Hey, Aviva. Welcome, one and all. Hey, Betty. June, I'm feeling okay. A little bit hoarse. I've been a little bit hoarse in the evenings lately. More so than usual, anyway. I'm just getting out of the allergies and stuff. But my allergies seem less bad in here. Hey, Sean. Happy to help. Hey, here's my dad, everybody. Here's the dead ringers. They'll show up one way or another. Hey, Katie. Hey, Jean. Oh, yes, Ramadan Mubarak. Hey, Gloria. All the places in my neighborhood are doing iftars for iftar deals for after sundown meals. Jean, ho, ho, ho. Yep, a little horse. I'm a pony now. I'm your little pony. Evening, everybody. Thought I'd show up, keeping on making a living here. Hey, Janice, Sambarita. Hey, Floricida. Hey, what do you guys think of a pop-up around Mystericon where we try to recreate Club de Lisa? Heather, it's someplace in your settings, but ever since I switched to going through Restream, there should have been closed captioning available. And that's been a while now, a couple of years. Trying to keep my vocal cords working.
Benny Goodman presents Ellen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Hey, Kathy. I'm drinking some Cha-Cha from Soviet Georgia. It's a grape vodka. Hey, Kelly. Good evening. Yeah, Gina DeLisa, who's in the comments, often just emailed me about photos from there. Apparently has quite a few. Hey, Cassidy. I'll come out there in a second. Which pictures are all of these that are up? Awesome. I guess last time I did this tour was around the time Sick Fisher was displaying at Trueborn. Hey, look at all these nice looking Mysterians. Yeah, what would you think of if we did Club de Lisa at Mystericon? Gene, that's possible. It is a very nice jacket for an eBay find. Octavio, can we recreate the Everlay Club? Not legally. But I bet I know people who I could get involved in that. Oh, I'm sure I do. Hey, Lee. Hey, Lee, we all love going to Trader Joe's. Give me some bottled water, okay? I need some of that sparkling stuff, the raspberry lime. Hey, Heather. Hey, Heather, I'm drinking out of Christie's Mysterious Chicago shot glass. Drinking cha-cha from Soviet, Georgia. Hard liquor made from grape. Here's Cassidy. Kristen, I've seen the pictures of your grandparents at the DeLisa. Yeah, you do need a close-up on the bookshelf. Let's move over here a little bit. Well, I'll just do that after a couple of minutes when we get out of the pre-show. Cassidy, isn't there a second volume of the Fairy Tales books?
Which fairy tale?
The blue one, the Reader's Digest one?
Yes.
There's one with Bluebeard in it, I remember.
Oh.
It scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
Just only read the first one, so that's the one we have.
Okay. I feel like there's 2 volumes of that.
Yes, there is, but I don't think we have it anymore.
Okay.
Which is kind of like
Well, it's a Reader's Digest book. I'm sure it could be really easily found. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, those things were printed in the
What?
gazillions. Hey, Doreen, I'm feeling all right. Hey, Paula. Hey, Geraldine. Hey, Tracy and Susan. Hey, Keely. Good evening, everybody. Welcome along. Mon Chi-Chi's Big Book of Korean Cooking.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh, Mon Chi-Chi, I can play guitar.
It's amazing.
Oh, Mang Chi-Chi, okay. I think like those 80s toys, Mon Chi-Chis.
Oh.
Mon Chi-Chi, Mon Chi-Chi. Evening, Donna. Ooh.
It's on Monday.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm leaving.
Hey, Lori. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Carol. I'll give it a minute for everybody from Chicago for Chicagoans to pop over. Are there any of my books here? Yep. A whole section up there.
Yep.
Why did that I put a spell on you in hardcover and paperback?
Oh, that really.
And you somehow have the paperback of Extraordinary, which I guess must be an advanced copy. I never came out in paperback. Ellen, I'm feeling all right. Had some allergies that continued.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Linda, I am in Georgia.
They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman.
Extraordinary is maybe my weirdest book.
I got 2 whole weeks, man. 2 whole weeks.
But all right, so welcome along, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome along. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I decided I would do, I do a virtual, for those of you not from around here, or don't normally hang out with us, every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central, I do a virtual tour. I try to do it even when I'm on the road. There will be a couple of Thursdays coming up when I'll be off in New York with school groups, so I'll be off at some kind of a Broadway show. You guys can just fend for yourselves. But I do try to keep up as much as I possibly can. Tonight, I am in Atlanta for my sister's wedding. I'm at my sister and her fiance's house right now. The allergies are definitely heating up in here, but I don't feel as bad as I did back at home. We really need to dust. But let's see here. I'll just show you around a little. First of all, I got to show off this hand. Please stop the violence. And next to that, there's a selection of Adam Selzer books. Plus, what's this random one at the back? Plus 3,000... Oh, that's one that Ronnie did. 3,000 would you rather questions. I've never seen a copy of that one. But, the one that we ghost wrote, that Ronnie and I ghost wrote, is going to be out in about a week, but I can't tell you guys which one that is. But let's wander around a little bit so I can see everybody who is here. Here's Cassidy. What the hell are you guys watching on the television? I'm going to hold up I'm going to hold this up. It's a few seconds delayed, but now you can see there's me, and then there's me, and then there's another me, and another me inside of that one.
It's the Dead Ringers Adam.
No, this is like the guy holding up a cereal box with a picture of him holding up the cereal box with a picture of him holding up the cereal box. This is a picture of infinity right here. We're really going like into the into the wild. We're all on acid right now is what's going on. Including Grandma Belle. Grandma Belle is definitely on all kinds of drugs right now. All kinds of psychedelics, right, Grandma Belle? She can't hear me. And my mother is over here.
I don't see me, but...
Yeah, they can see you.
Hello.
You'll be there in a second.
Hi, guys.
You're a little bit behind over here.
Yeah, I don't watch that.
And Christy is back over here, if I spin correctly. There's Christy, my sister's fiance. And I'm just going to stand here one more time so we can see as much of this as possible.
Where's Darcy on the...
Oh yeah, we got to show the cat too. First, I just want to see how much of this how many of me we can see in the background here. It seems like it should go on forever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, we're getting weird on here. And this is Darcy. Mr. Darcy, the cat, is unreachable to me right now. Mr. Darcy.
Oh, he's very tired.
Yeah.
He's half Maine Coon.
Half Maine Coon, Mr. Darcy is. So, all right. Welcome along, everybody. And once again, here's a distinct reminder. Here's my dad back over here. Distinct reminder to please stop the violence. Yeah, don't listen to that former president guy who's saying, they tell us to be nonviolent. Yes. Also, I remember this Reader's Digest book of fairy tales I remember having when I was a kid. The other volume has a really scary version of Bluebeard in it. But a guy who kills his wives and hangs them up on meat hooks in his closet. Great fodder for a children's Christmas show, just ask the Iroquois. But all right, everybody, welcome along. So, I figured today I would give myself kind of an easy one. Those of you who may not know, I'm Adam, the author of Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, Murder Maps USA, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, and Just Kill Me, a novel about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. It's only partly autobiographical. Also a talking head on any number of shows, so I am incredibly famous. But what we're going to do today is a virtual cemetery tour that I call the Off-Route Cemetery Tour. Walking tour season is starting up again. The first walking tour of the year is coming up in just a few weeks. But there are certain graves that I never seem to get to on the walking tours. They're just geographically too far away. So today we are going to go to a few of those. Let's go on into here to Graceland Cemetery here in Chicago, 4 blocks north of Wrigley Field. Hey, Tashira. Hey, anybody just joining us? Thanks to everybody who's been clicking those donate buttons. So we'll just kind of wander into Graceland Cemetery here. This is a section we don't really see much nowadays because it's all closed down for construction through about August. Keep that in mind if you're coming with us on April 16th. I think it's the 16th, right? Right. Well, let's go clear up to the opposite corner of the cemetery. We'll also switch the timeline here. We've gone from fall all the way into winter. Right up over here, just to the left of this marked grave in front of the tree, is an unmarked grave for a woman by the name of Julius Steinbrecher. Maria Julia Steinbrecher. Pictured here on the left. She seems to have been fairly wealthy in 1895 when she was living here in Chicago. At the time, she owned quite a bit of property. She was either a widow or divorced. I haven't really figured out what the deal with her previous husband was, but I believe he was dead. Usually, in this kind of story, it comes to be a widow. But she owned quite a bit of property. Meanwhile, a guy had just moved to town who was operating a tavern down on Western Avenue, and that would be this handsome devil right over here with the mustache, Johann Hawk. This is one of the clearest photographs available of Johann Hawk, one of his younger ones. So he would have only been about, figure 35 or so here. I'm digging the alfalfa hair on Julia there, too. But not long after Julia and Johann got married in late 1895, she began to get sick and started telling her people around her, "I think I am being poisoned." But those people would immediately be banned from the house. The housekeeper stayed around the place and was under the impression that Hawk was planning to marry her as soon as Julia was gone. But by and by, Julia did die. Now, the funeral procession on the way to Graceland Cemetery was actually held up. Somebody was so suspicious that he got people to hold up the funeral procession. But Hawk showed up with a death certificate saying that she had died of natural causes, and all they could do was let them proceed on to the cemetery. What they didn't realize was just a few months before, Hawk had faked his death in Wheeling, West Virginia, after another wife died shortly after the wedding. And over the course of the next decade, 3 other women would die shortly after marrying him, and another 16 or so would be deserted shortly after marrying him. It may have been more than that. Those are just the ones that I can really back up. But then he married a woman by the name of Marie Walker here in Chicago. She died a month later, and while the body was still on the bed, Hawk proposed to her sister. And the sister said yes. And he didn't kill her, he just took her money and ran off to New York, but that left her alive to call the cops and the newspapers. So this launched a massive manhunt. They caught up with him having already proposed to somebody else in New York about a few weeks later. And the rest, as we say, is history. This has been the subject of my new research project for a while now. And hey, everybody, look who's here. It's Luca.
And Otis.
And Otis. Luca and Otis. How you doing, Luca?
Good, and Otis is good too.
Otis is good as well? Excellent. Then we are all well.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for stopping by, Luca. All right. All right. I thought they'd make an appearance at some point. But all right. So this has been my research project for the last year or so, trying to piece together all of the real story of Johann Hawk. Some of you might have been out there when we did Find a Grave Friday to find Maria's grave. There's a couple of other related graves around the place. We've been to a couple of his wives' graves on Find a Grave. But let's move on a little bit. We'll go back behind the chapel. We do go back here on the walking tours occasionally. Once or twice we've been up here. We'll pass the columbarium here featuring Marion Mahoney Griffin, probably the most notable woman architect. And right next to her, Barbara, who wrote the Architecture Foundation writer who did a book on Graceland before mine. And I got to meet her just lately. She was delightful. We had a great time talking. We'll make our way along here, back behind Mausoleum Row. To one of my favorite graves in the cemetery. There's just so rarely a grave where you can tell a lot about somebody from the gravestone. Well, this one is Vincent Starrett. You can see there's the large book there. Vincent was the Chicago Tribune's book critic for a long time. Carl Sandburg said he could have been airlifted into any time period in history and still would have made his way through. Not very difficult to find good pictures of the guy. But as you can kind of see from the gravestone, he was a major Sherlock Holmes enthusiast. He wrote a book called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is still considered a very early authoritative scholarly text examining Sherlock Holmes. There's also the legend that's written in on here, and it is always 1895. He wrote that line twice, most famously in a sonnet called 221B, all about Holmes and Watson, that ends with, "Here though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. There's also a prose bit in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes that there can be no grave for Holmes and Watson, for do they not live still, and etc., here in our nostalgic heart and the mind, where it is always 1895. Now, this is one picture that I was able to find of him was on his passport. I really like that look, too. That's a pretty interesting hairstyle, kind of a nice haunted look that he's rocking there. You can see he signed his name, Charles P. Starrett. But there's also this picture of him. He contributed a chapter to a book called Chicago Murders that came out in the 1930s. This is a picture at Marshall Field from the autograph signing party where several of the authors who worked on the book showed up. Sitting next to him wearing that smashing hat is Nelise Child, who wrote a chapter for the book on Marble Mildred, a murderer, and had a great line in it. When a husband kills his wife, he usually kills himself too. When a wife kills her husband, she usually decides that's enough for one day. You might know her as Lillian Colley. She was the flapper who ran The Wind Blew In about 15 years before this was taken. I have, since writing the book Just Kill Me, where I tried to figure out what had happened to her, I have found a couple of other things. There's a couple of other Sun Times articles that casually mention, oh yeah, that Nelise Child writer, you might remember her from The Wind Blew In back when she was called Lillian Colley. So yes, I am 100% sure that it is the same person. At the time, she was writing mystery novels quite a bit. In the 1940s, she wrote a couple of more serious novels. But that is her in a fantastic-looking hat. But we'll move on a little bit. This will probably be a little bit of a shorter tour than usual, partly because I'm feeling kind of hoarse, partly because I got a whole family here that I shouldn't be neglecting. Katie was born the day Lillian and Elise died. That is interesting. You might have passed in the hall. This is part of the DeWolf family, featuring William Frederick DeWolf, who had lived in Alton, Illinois, around the time that Eliza Lovejoy was murdered for operating an abolitionist newspaper. People who remember that later, the town was deeply ashamed of it. They remember that William Frederick DeWolf had been there urging people to let him keep publishing the newspaper, and later said, if only we had listened to him, we wouldn't have this shameful episode on our consciences. His son was killed fighting for the Union. He ended up dying at Isaac Newton Arnold's house, a friend of Abraham Lincoln. There's an interesting line in the paper about it. Truly, the dart of the insatiable archer has found a shining mark. They never write like that in newspaper reports of people dying anymore. Now, William Frederick DeWolf was an invalid the last decade or so of his life, but insisted on being carried to the polls so that he should vote on Election Day, which here in Georgia, where I am right now, is probably not even legal anymore. Not the way they've been running this place anyway. Now, at any given cemetery, there's about 175,000 people buried here, give or take 10,000. Naturally, we are going to get heroes and we are going to get villains. Here is one of the villains, Henry Rhines. I do not have a picture of Henry Rhines. I do have one of his son, who was also known as Dump Rhines, famous billiard player. But Henry himself was an early Chicago cop. He could have written himself into history by being the first person to arrest a convicted murderer. He arrested John Stone, who may have even been a serial killer, back in 1840 when the Chicago police force featured him and like 2 other people. But he used his position as a police officer primarily to arrest people that he thought might have been fugitive slaves. He was involved in this for quite a long time. Even during periods when he wasn't working as a police officer, he seemed to really get a lot of pleasure out of slave catching. And at one point, he actually killed a guy. He had arrested a guy and put him in jail. A bartender he was frequenting was mad about it, so the two of them fought until eventually Henry pulled out a gun and shot the bartender. He was taken to jail, and the bartender died of the wounds. Rhines somehow escaped and went down to New Orleans. And I have just recently, I hadn't found this in time for the Graceland book, but I have found that he actually was pardoned by the governor and then got right back to his job as a slave catcher. So you all know me. When I get to a grave like this, I always want to do a little dance on this person's grave. I was running out of dance moves by the time I got to Henry Rhines. I've only got a couple of them. Like I found out today, my grandmother, I cannot compute dance instructions. People will tell me, like, relax your knees or soften your knees, and this just does not compute in my brain. But I can do the hand jive. So that's what we have done here on Henry Rhines. Born to hand jive, baby. Born to hand jive, baby. Speaking of guys who suck, let's go over and see William McCormick while we're at it, too. William McCormick is one of the McCormick brothers, the three McCormick brothers who came to Chicago to sell the Reaper, the mechanical Reaper that Cyrus had invented. Though William and his brother Leander, over in this plot, far away from Cyrus because they all hated each other, believed that their father had invented it and they were all supposed to share it, and Cyrus was just taking all of the credit. Now, I mentioned they all hated each other. That's one time when I agree with these guys. They were all right to hate each other. They all really sucked. William was the first one to die, but he had spent the 1860s lamenting about how the Civil War was going. He really wanted the South to win. He and his wife stopped going to church because of the abolitionist sermons. Now, they had been slaveholders back in Virginia, probably, I believe, still had some people they were enslaving at the time. The most known was a guy named Joe Anderson, who Cyrus eventually bought a house for, which was also enough to buy his complicity in the stories as the family fought over who really owned the Reaper. But there's one thing I was really proud to do in the Graceland book is knock him down to also ran status at his own family plot, because in the grave with him, over to the left, is a grave for Herbert Stewart Stone. Now, Herbert Stewart Stone was the son of Melville Stone, the founder of the Associated Press, and he was a publisher himself, possibly best known for being the founder of House Beautiful magazine, for one thing, but also the publisher for Rudyard Kipling here in Chicago. And he thought Kipling was just great. It's like, finally, somebody who's not writing realistic stuff. Somebody's writing stuff that never happened and couldn't possibly have happened. He had some fine quotes about that, but he married a granddaughter of William McCormick, and by the time he would have met her, William was long dead, so he was spared the indignity of ever having to meet the guy. Then he died on the Lusitania when that was sunk years later during the build-up to World War I. He was in the process of sailing. Somebody saw him say torpedo, and then he ran out of the room, and that was the last that was seen of him. But he's actually buried here. There are a couple of Titanic markers here in Graceland Cemetery, but they're cenotaphs. They're markers for a body that's not actually buried there. His body actually did wash ashore onto the coast of Ireland and was shipped all the way back, so he's actually buried here in the plot. Let's move on a bit. This one I got interested in just because I liked the dude's name. You might have seen Olivia's talk about the Playboy mansion in Chicago, talking about how Shel Silverstein lived in the basement. There was a time when you could be a wild and crazy guy and still be a children's book author. Weldon Cobb is one of those. Weldon Cobb, I got interested just because I liked the name, Weldon Cobb. Throughout the early 1860s, Weldon Cobb, or the mid-1860s, Weldon Cobb turns up in the papers a lot, partly because he was writing for one of them. He was writing like poetry for one of the newspapers, but mostly he was in the press for his drunken antics and getting shot by Waterford Jack, one of the most famous sex workers in Chicago in the 1860s. Later, a skull reputed to be hers would be on display at the Whitechapel Club. But after years of carousing and sowing his wild oats, well, at some point he married Sadie, for one thing, but also he became a children's book author, primarily doing ghostwriting. He wrote a whole series, the Dave Dashaway books. Dave Dashaway, Boy Pilot, back when airplanes were still brand new and nobody realized how dull commercial flying was eventually going to be. Wrote that under the name of Roy Rockwood. There's Dashaway and his hydroplane, flying over what appears to be a very dull town. No, Dave, don't crash there. It looks really boring. There's a couple of examples of his books under his real name, like The Protector of Finance, Tales of Resilius Marvel, Guardian of Bank Treasure. Well, that sounds interesting. Real interesting. But yeah, it's interesting. He wrote something in the way of 100 children's book over the years, primarily under other names, like me. After a long career of getting shot by sex workers, couldn't get away with that on book Twitter anymore. We're also going to cover just a couple of interesting epitaphs while we're here. This one I especially like. This is I sometimes hold this up as an example of what kind of tours I do. Here's this guy who was Secretary of the United States Treasury, an important cabinet post under President Taft, Franklin McVeigh. Then behind him is Lillian Julian Partek, whose gravestone has a Smashing Pumpkins line on it. Lily, my one and only. Between the two, the Secretary of the Treasury and this, I am definitely going to write more about the Smashing Pumpkins lady. She was a graphic designer. In her final tweet, she said all that she learned about typography, she learned from watching The Price is Right. Died of breast cancer, 2013. And I was really excited to find that grave and be able to write it in. On up over here in the section that is primarily graves that are about grass level. There's also, very rarely do you see a mullet on a gravestone. But I just love this epitaph. Joseph Schuler. Ha! That was it? That's not quite a mullet. It's pretty close. Pretty close to a 1991 style mullet, like the Seinfeld mullet. We'll move over here. This is William Hegart, a cigar manufacturer. Well, this is a case where the family probably initially bought this whole entire space, but didn't use much of it, so they sold a lot of it back to the cemetery for use as single grave markers. And there's this one I just love over here, Joseph Jude McCaskey, with a smiley face and a peace sign. A Sven, as we used to call those in middle school, the smiley faces. He was tidy. Love yourself. Joseph, as you'll notice, there has been no sunset, just the sunrise. His mother owns the Chicago Bears. It's that McCaskey family. I think he lives up in Wisconsin someplace. Move over a bit. Donna, right you are there. It's even more and more likely I'll be in Manhattan right at the right time for all of that to go down. There's also this one. I dig this too. David Silbar. Rock on. Definitely rock on, David. And while we're nearby here, there's also this rather unassuming one for Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who was probably the most prominent black surgeon of his generation. Most famously, back in 1893, a guy came into his the Providence Hospital where he was working, saying, "I got to see Dr. Dan immediately." He had been stabbed in a bar fight with what newspapers described the next day as a sailor's knife. And Dr. Williams made an examination and realized the stab wound had gone straight into his heart. Now, normally in this case, the situation would be the guy is dead. That's it. I actually talked about this as a talking head on like Mysteries in the Museum or one of those type of shows. And they wanted me to pull up the drama like Dr. Dan knew that he had to work quickly. It was a huge risk. And it was not a huge risk. This guy was dead where he stood. But timing his stitches to the beat of his heart, he was actually able to stitch the heart back up. As far as anybody knew at the time, it was the first instance of successful open heart surgery. And it made the news in 1893. Sewed up his heart. He was a member of various philosophy groups around Chicago, too. Lived in D.C. for quite a bit. While we're in the area here. He made it a number of really notable surgeries like that. Some of the ones in that article about him, or the article that had that picture of the guy being stitched up, are just astounding. So this is William Holbert with the baseball grave. He was the founder of the National League. And also, according to Mr. Spalding, the Spalding baseball glove empire guy, who is not considered a reliable source in general. He's the whole source of the idea that Abner Doubleday was the inventor of baseball. If you've ever read any of Abner Doubleday's own books, he wrote about his experiences at Fort Sumter. If he had any claim on baseball, he would have absolutely told everybody who would listen about it. In his books, he about takes credit for the world being round. It's hilarious. But he was, according to him, William Holbert was the source of one of the great Chicago quotes. He used to say, "I would rather be a lamppost in Chicago than a millionaire in any other town." And I will drink to that. I'd rather be a lamppost in Chicago than a millionaire in Mar-a-Lago, I'll tell you that. I'll move just over from this to a guy who tends to turn up in some of the 1890s railings of Baron Yerkes. The railings against the governor and the mayor and his cartel of guys like Tommy the Clock. He also liked to rail against William D. Kerfoot, who was a realtor, perhaps best known for quickly rebuilding his real estate office right after the Great Chicago Fire. And right over on the side there, you can see the most famous sign ever written. This would be written into his advertising for years. William D. Kerfoot, all gone but wife, children, and energy. One of the most famous pieces of advertising in Chicago history right there. And from here, since this is a virtual tour, we can pop from cemetery to cemetery, and we'll head over to Rose Hill. Just a couple of miles north of Graceland. Michelle or anyone just joining us, we were just lately at Graceland, doing some graves that don't normally come up on the walking tours just because of the geography. We'll check out a couple of them here. Now, some of the ones that I've got in the deck here, I actually do have on the second version of the walking tour. This guy's known really for his name. Dr. Victor Frankenstein, M.D. Born well after the book came out and lived long enough to see the movies come out. And get this, Victor Frankenstein, I'm sure, was a professor of anatomy, a demonstrator of anatomy, just like the doctor in the book might have been, at Northwestern University. So obituary notes, dead at 85, practicing medicine in Chicago before 1900. Later years, he specialized in the disease of the aged. Well, that's convenient. His wife, Irma Frankenstein, wrote a diary that turned up in an antique shop some years back, and much of it has now been republished. She talked about, going to vote for the first time. Some interesting stuff. Who else was I going to add out of this? Here's a guy that they're always kind of surprised that I don't throw this guy in the walking tour. He's just not conveniently located geographically. I don't really go too far out of the way for a guy who doesn't have that great of a story. But this is Oscar Mayer here at Rose Hill. When I was first running ghost tours, they told me occasionally they'd have a bunch of Wienermobiles come in here to have a weenie roast at this grave. But that is apparently not true. But this is Oscar Mayer, who ran a deli here in Chicago starting in the 1880s over in Old Town. And of course, the rest is history.
Class attention. Forward march. Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I truly like to be.
Hey.
'Cause if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, everyone would be in love with me. A big parade is so inspiring. Oh, I'm glad I'm not an Oscar Mayer wiener.
Hey, what's with this kid?
That is what I never want to be. 'Cause if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener,
He's about to get hit, right?
there would soon be nothing left
Oh, there would be nothing left of
Oh, I love to be an
Oscar Mayer wieners are all meat,
Well, that'll teach
all
him.
good meat, rich in complete meat protein, mildly seasoned to bring out all the good meat flavor.
Everyone would be in love with me. Next week, you handle just the refreshments, Freddie.
Well, that'll teach that kid anyway. He's probably walking around singing Pepsi Cola is the drink to pour down the kitchen sink, too. Let's also cover a bit over here. This one, I always lose track of where exactly this one is. This is Ida Hippoc, who lost a couple of children in the Iroquois Theater fire here. You can see Robert and Archie both died in 1903. They died in the Iroquois Theater fire, December 3rd and 30th of 1903. She eventually went over to Europe after that. When she came back, she was on the Titanic. So this is one of the handful of Titanic survivors. So she's connected to two major great tragedies like that, both the Iroquois Theater fire and a Titanic survivor. Really an incredible story. We'll also cover just briefly. I'm going to mix this one up a little bit. This is Julius Rosenwald, whose synagogue still calls him our greatest member. He built hundreds and hundreds. Some estimates go up into the thousands of Rosenwald schools for black children all over the South, in areas that often, we always hear there was the black school and the white school. Often, really, it was just the white school. The separate but equal thing wasn't generally followed. But in addition to him, in addition to Julius himself, his wife is also here. His wife turns up in some of the articles about Lillian Colley. Lillian Colley, the flapper that we mentioned earlier, she was railing against flappers and snuggle puppies. In particular, snuggle puppies, and cautioned people to teach their daughters better morality than that because they were the ones leading young men astray. Kind of stuff that we would never well, people would still say it, but we know better than to say it now. And all right, I don't know where my closing one is on this. Pop it back over. All right. So as I said, this is going to be kind of a shorter one today. I don't want to be neglecting my family around over here, but still feel free to hit those buttons down over there. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I will be popping in when I can over the course of the weekend while I am on the road. Same thing with Sunday morning. I don't know what's going to happen since I'm on the road. And next couple of weekends after that, I'm going to be in other spaces. Hey, everybody, I bet you were wondering where Ronnie is. Since everybody else is here. And Laura, correction, Mom did not die on the Titanic. She was just on the ship. But all right, thanks everybody for joining me. There are still a few tickets left for the April 16th walking tour that is coming up. Do I have that up in here? No, I don't. This is, what were we promoting last time we did this tour? Uptown Tales. But all right, Whiskey and a Cookie. I don't know if I'll be present for Whiskey and a Cookie. I'll probably try to pop in a little bit. But I am busy with family stuff this weekend down here in Atlanta. It is my sister's wedding. So congratulations to Cassidy and Christy, who are just over in the next room. Thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Laura, we had a bit of a breakthrough with the dinner plans today, but it's all still coming up. There's so many buttons to tick and costs to work out, etc., etc. But thanks for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, remember, stay spooky, everybody. Have a great night. I'm going to go blow my nose.